Hello and welcome to this special conversation presented by Grow at the Wallis. The Wallis is the Wallis-Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts in Beverly Hills, California. And Grow at the Wallis is the umbrella for our education and outreach initiatives. I'm Mark Slavkin. I'm proud to serve as Director of Education and lead those education and outreach initiatives. And pleased that you could join us for the conversation today. The idea for today's talk was inspired by a special week last March at the Wallis. In fact, it was the very last week of live performances before the pandemic hit. And so it will always have a special place in my heart. We certainly hope it is not the last ever live performance, that we hope to be back in the building when conditions allow that. But um, I will always remember it because it was a fantastic week and it was our last event. It was a week in partnership with From the Top, one of the terrific music education initiatives, I would call it, based in Boston. From the Top is an NPR radio program that highlights the talent and voices of young musicians, particularly in the classical music world. And that week back in March, the Wallis hosted the students who you meet in a second, Peter Dugan, who co-hosted the program and performed, and Jazmin Morales, who has a special role with From the Top in encouraging young people to think about arts leadership and community engagement. So in addition to remembering a great week, it really sparked in my mind this idea of how we're preparing young musicians for a life in music, a life that goes beyond performing on stage, but a life about making a positive difference in the community. And believe that those ideas and values should be encouraged and instilled in musicians at a young age, and not something they would fall into by accident when they're much older. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that week and some very positive memories, and then pivot to kind of the larger conversation about the role of music and musicians as citizen artists. So finally, I want to thank Gregory Weingarten, who was our lead sponsor for that week of From the Top at the Wallis. And Gregory and Grow at Annenberg have been foundational supporters and funders that allowed this program Grow to even exist in the first place. So we are forever grateful for Gregory and his support and his leadership and his philanthropy. With that, I want to introduce Jazmin Morales, who is joining us from Colburn School, where she is involved in a number of issues related to this topic, and also wears a hat as part of the From the Top team that we'll talk about. On my other side, on my screen, is Peter Dugan, who is the host of From the Top, the radio program, also performs and accompanies students often as part of that program, and in his spare time travels the world as an acclaimed pianist, both in the classical music world, but someone who also crosses genres, which I love, and really models the idea that a life in music is not limited to one lane or one genre, but talents can be spread across infinite genres or even making new genres. So Peter, we're delighted that you're here today. And then we wanted to center the conversation with the voices of two of the students who participated at the Wallis that week. They and two of their colleagues joined us as part of the Quantum Saxophone Quartet based in Dallas, Texas, and performed a piece that I will never, ever forget, a piece that I believe was composed for strings. And they reimagined it for bari sax, tenor, alto, soprano sax. And if you close your eyes, you wouldn't know really that those were saxophones. They were so aligned with each other. The dynamics were amazing. And just their breathing was in sync. So it felt like you could be listening to an orchestra. So I will ever thank you for giving me that moment, but it's been recorded and the whole program can be listened to again on the From the Top website. So we encourage you, if you're inspired to learn more and revisit the week at the Wallis, it's program 386, I believe, on From the Top. So those two young men, Ekdev Rajkitkul and GianCarlo Lay, who goes by Gian, are representing their peers and obviously their individual voices. So again, thank you all for taking time to do this. It warms my heart to see you and remind us that life goes on, and hope that we can all collaborate in person in the future in different ways. So let me start, maybe Ekdev, if you want to just kick off. What did that week mean to you, or and maybe what happened? Just describe that week, and then maybe Gian, you can go next and share sort of what you took away from the experience.
Yeah, of course. So this last March, before the pandemic happened, we got to perform at the From the Top um, show in Beverly Hills, and it was at actually the Wallis. And so it was about a 3-day trip, and the first day was really about creating an interactive performance at the Wallis, which we performed in our 3rd day. So after recording Memory for the From the Top show, we performed an interactive performance for a wide spread of audiences from as young as elementary school to our age, or my age being 18. And so with that, our quartet, as well as May, who's a cello player, Bianca, who's a violinist, and Olivia, who's a piano player. And we all pretty much created this performance, and it was designed to be very unconventional to a regular performance. And, a regular performance, you would think it'd be very, the audience is there to see you perform. But I believe it was kind of an interesting spin to where it was more like a conversation. And so taking away from that performance, they got to know a little bit more about us as musicians, and we got to know a little bit more about the audience that we were playing for. So it was a really great experience overall.
Great, thank you. And Gian, what did you take away? Like when you were flying back, what stood out that you might hold with you going forward?
I think one of the biggest things that I took away personally was one of the conversations we had out in the courtyard about audience interaction and about the notion that a lot of classical performances have to be like formal and really, kind of boring sometimes. We talked about how a normal, like everyday person might fall asleep in an audience of a classical performance, and talking about ways that we can kind of counteract that in ways that we can connect with our audience more. And that was really cool to me because as a performer, I think it's really interesting, the concept of having a conversation with the audience. And as a classical player, that's something really like you don't see a lot. And it was really cool to me. And I'm constantly thinking of ways that I can have that in my music, in my playing, and in my performance when I'm practicing and when I'm playing for others. I'm always thinking about that now. Since we've had that conversation, it was like mind blowing to me, like having a classical performance and having it interacting with an audience. It was really cool. And it was like Ekdev said, it was one of the things that we tried to have in our performance for the audience, the promo show. And it was really cool how we put together a show like that in such little time. And maybe like it was 15 minutes before the performance where we decided, hey, maybe I should dance during one of our music breaks. And then the quartet decided to go along with it, and it turned out really great, and it was a lot of fun. And ever since that experience, it's changed the way I've thought about music and performance in general.
Great, I love hearing that. I would just clarify that typically From the Top records the program live in front of an audience, and that program is recorded for broadcast and has a certain format and certain rhythm to it. We at the Wallis were actually inspired by friends at the LA Phil who had worked with From the Top earlier and added a student matinee component like the following day. So that encouraged me to do that here. So that's what we were referencing. There was the radio program in the evening, and the next morning about 500 students, K through 12, really, a diverse group of kids from all over LA came. And so they were the same and they were different. You guys were wearing t-shirts and tennis shoes, I think, for that student show, which I think actually made it much more welcoming and inclusive for them than had you been all dressed up. So maybe, Jazmin, if you could talk about your role with the idea of arts leadership and community engagement, and how did that look that week at the Wallis? What, in some of the conversations you helped facilitate, what were you kind of driving at?
Sure. So from the arts leadership and community engagement perspective, as Ekdev and Gian discussed, we were really focusing in on interactive performance and how we can design performance experiences to connect beyond a traditional artist and audience dynamic. And so we discussed kind of 4 core principles of community of interactive performance. The first being this engagement framework, right? And so we talk about the direction of engagement. Sometimes in a traditional concert setting, it's very much that outreach type engagement where it's one directional coming from the artist who holds everything to the audience who is there to only receive. Whereas engagement kind of activates the audience a little bit more, moving into like an exchange that becomes kind of like a conversation and ultimately hopefully resulting in some sort of co-creative experience, right? So allowing the audience to fully participate in the art making that's happening. And so we explored kind of that spectrum and where we wanted to approach the morning performance the next day. The other element we talked about was trying to fit in educational components. So since we had such a hugely diverse audience in terms of age and background, we wanted to be able to bring in some musical knowledge that felt friendly for everyone, friendly and useful. And so thinking about how to design performances that also teach something, and also thinking about the relevance piece, right? So how do we make classical music, which is maybe something that our audience has never heard before or is unfamiliar with, how do we make that something that relates to them, and ultimately leading us to this question of connection or belonging, right? How can we structure this performance so that the audience doesn't just feel entertained, but actually feels seen by what's happening, and thereby solidifying their comfort level in a place like the concert hall, right? So I'm sure a lot of those kids are going to be like, oh yeah, the Wallis, I've been there. We had a great time. Like that's a place for me. And so that's really what we were trying to build in terms of experience for our audience.
Fabulous. I want to acknowledge our friend and colleague Vijay Gupta, who co-hosted that week with Peter. And Vijay, unfortunately, is not able to join us today, but was an important part of that week. And I remember in the student matinee, I think it was Vijay who said, music doesn't always have to be happy and joyful, that sometimes music helps us process pain or sadness. And he looked at the audience and said, have ever of you had that experience of dealing with something difficult or sad? And I'll never forget this young woman, maybe 12, if you guys remember, stood up and said that soon after she was born, her mother became blind. And ever since she was tiny, she had to be eyes for her mother and help support that. And that's often hard. And I was just so struck that we gave a space for her to have the courage to get up in front of all these other kids where there might be a risk of giggling or snickering or something like that. But I think she felt supported, and you guys set that tone where she felt courageous enough or safe enough to get up and share that. And I thought that's remarkable. I mean, that none of us knew that story would happen, but that's an example, Jazmin, of creating an environment that's truly shared and not the audience just watching passively the artist. So Peter is a sort of spans all these different worlds, right? So there's the more formal classic music world that Jazmin referenced. There's a certain style and aesthetic around From the Top. You've done your own outreach initiatives with Operation Superpower, I think it's called, and maybe other things. So do you feel like these different worlds have walls between them and you have to be strictly adhering to a certain set of expectations? Or is one of your goals to challenge that and sort of shake that up?
That's a good question. I think that one thing that we all learned together at the Wallis that week was that um, different means of expression, different means of communication can be more or less successful depending on where you are and who you're with and how you're communicating. And so there's 2 ways to look at this. Either you can focus on on the differences. When I'm in front of this audience, I should be more like that. When I'm in front of that audience, I should be more like that. Or you can, which is useful to an extent, or you can kind of get past that to the underlying truth of it all, which is what are the qualities that I want to bring on stage, no matter who my audience is. Um, and so yeah, it might look a little different depending on where I'm at, but there are some core principles that should always be in place. And like, authenticity is very high on the list for me. So that no matter where you are, you have to be yourself. It's not about putting on a different persona to please a different audience or a different community. And then the other thing is making, as Jazmin mentioned, making the space safe for the audience and for you and your fellow performers. So I think like you can find those core principles and apply them no matter where your concert is. And by the way, nowadays we're applying that here on virtual concerts from home. And I think that's one of the really cool things that we can learn from the experience of doing virtual concerts is vulnerability is another one. The importance of being vulnerable on stage as a performer. How do I make myself vulnerable in front of a camera? And how do I make my audience who's maybe watching on their TV or their computer? How do I make them feel comfortable? So all these, and how do I be authentic even when it's just to a camera? So I think all of these things are true no matter what audience we're performing for. And yeah, sometimes we'll be more dressed up than other times, but that's not as important as the underlying commonalities.
Yeah. And I find, audiences obviously love the music and are drawn to the music, but the more human the artist is, the more the audience typically values that. And yet we don't always train people that way. Sometimes they're trained to be sort of take their whole person out of it and focus on their technique or their artistry in the music. So I'm wondering, Jazmin, from where you are at Colburn, do you feel like the world changing, or certainly Colburn changing, in humanizing a life in music and stretching the goals beyond the concert stage to this idea of social impact, or just making a difference in the lives of our communities?
Absolutely. I think this year has really changed a lot of the work that we do, but has shifted our priorities in ways that are really exciting for me, because we've been doing this work at Colburn for many years, but for it to finally feel validated and recognized and held in higher esteem feels really good, but also is just, I think, very promising for me in thinking about the longevity of our art form and the field. And so just to know that we're working in this direction really it makes me feel hopeful. And so what we're doing at Colburn is expanding upon our career development initiatives as much as possible, even in the time of the pandemic. So currently we're really focusing on this practice of interactive performance, as well as citizen artistry and community engagement, teaching artistry and pedagogy, as well as entrepreneurship and innovation. And so we're excited to see how those initiatives will grow and change, especially over the next year, as we work to embed them into the curriculum that every student receives at Colburn, and formalizing the delivery of this content.
Right. No, I love that. That it is for everyone, and not like this obscure elective for only those quirky people who want to do that work.
Exactly.
Like, to be a great musician, in my mind, requires that that work. So when you think of a Gustavo Dudamel, or a Yo-Yo Ma, or a Wynton Marsalis, or a Leonard Bernstein, all the work they did to change the world was not because they couldn't cut it as a musician. In fact, it is at the heart of who they are as people, and another outlet beyond what they do on stage. Ekdev, I'm curious about your future plans, and how do you see music in your life going forward?
Yeah, of course. So definitely, I'd say this last March has changed my entire perception of music. And I find that music is slowly becoming part of my life every day. Like even though I'm here at college, I'm adulting. I feel like, I still feel like that I'm connected to me as a classical musician. Here at the university here, we every week, about 3 days a week, we perform as a wind symphony. Socially distanced. It's definitely a change, but it's so good to be able to play music with people after so long. And I feel like with my senior year getting a little bit cut short on that, it's good to somewhat get to a new normal. And I think going forward, I definitely feel like I want to be a part of that world, and I still want to be a part of other musicians' lives. And I think that past high school, I find that a lot of my peers, after graduating high school, it's almost like they've graduated music, and I find that I think music is just kind of like a lifelong progression. And and I think like whenever I have a family or whenever I make friends, I want music to be at the heart of that. So that's just one thing that I took away with.
Okay, thank you. And what about you, Gian?
I would definitely say that this past March has really solidified my love for music. And after that experience, I definitely decided this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. It wasn't until like that moment that I really knew this is this is me. Like this is who I am. This is who I want to be. These are the people I want to be around. And I think it's beautiful, like the things that music has brought to my life and to so many people's life. And one of the biggest aspects of music that I love the most is the people. And there's just so many people you can connect with and you can just vibe with through music. And it's not just like, it could be something as simple as jamming in the car. It could be something as simple as being in the football stands with a marching band, or it could be something like Ekdev and I, who have worked really hard together in quartet and spent so much time, really connecting with each other through music and understanding each other a lot more. And it's really meaningful to me that you can have that kind of connection with somebody because of music. And I just think that I can't really live my life any other way other than with music. It's become a part of me. It's become my soul. It's become my heart and soul. And I think that it's gonna be the biggest. It's gonna be the biggest player in how I live my life in the future. Definitely.
Well, I still love hearing that. And I'm channeling my friend Gretchen Nielsen, who leads the From the Top team, that what you said is sort of the point of all this. So thank you for being so articulate about it. Peter, if you can go all the way back to your training in high school or Juilliard where you trained, were the kind of values that Jazmin just articulated central to that, or was that not embedded in your own sort of academic training?
Um, honestly, I was at Juilliard right at the moment when these things were starting to take place in the awareness of at least the administration there. The notion of career development, entrepreneurialism in young musicians was they were just starting to kind of shift in that direction. And I had a lot of conversations with board members and with administration in the early stages of that when we were talking about the importance of all of it. But just going back to what Hasmin said, what struck me was that um, it is the job of these schools to and organizations to make sure these things are a priority and to make them frankly required, because when you're a teenager and you get to conservatory and you're in your practice room and you hear the person on the other side of the wall, all you can think about is trying to make sure that you sound better than the person on the other side of the wall. It's the way, sadly, it's the way that things have been for so long, and the way the training works. So I think it's really our job to try to dismantle that and 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 bring this awareness that that's not really what it's about at the end of the day, and but if it's an elective, if there's like that one business of music class that's an elective, like you said, that's, we can't expect young musicians to understand the importance of that. I certainly didn't when I was that age. And so I had to kind of retroactively learn things and play catch up. So I think it's really great. It's really wonderful to see that more schools, Colburn, of course, is really helping to lead the way there. Juilliard is also doing some good stuff too. I can't put them down, my alma mater, too much, but yeah, it's good to see it's becoming more widespread thanks to the leadership of people like yourself, Asmin, and I think it's crucial. It really is.
So this term citizen artistry or citizen artist was new to me, and it came to my attention through the Kennedy Center in Washington that hosts an annual art summit, and in recent years developed a fellowship for citizen artists. And that's when I first heard that term. And coincidentally, we at the Wallis nominated Vijay Gupta to be a Citizen Artist Fellow, and he was selected. And through that journey, I became more familiar with it. So I know you've co-taught or co-facilitated with Vijay, Hasmin. Do you use that term citizen artist, or what does that mean to you? What does the phrase mean to you?
To me, it means an artist who is aware of their social location and who uses their artistry to enact meaningful change in the world. So the term was actually coined by Joseph Polisi, who was a former president of Juilliard before Damien Wetzel. And so really the idea started there. And I think the term has been used a lot to describe artists who do community engagement work and whose community engagement work is central to their sort of artist identity. Someone like Vijay certainly fits that description. But I think especially in this time, a citizen artist, or the term citizen artist takes on a specific activist lens for me. So a citizen artist is someone who is civically engaged, who is using their art to participate in conversations about working towards the change that we need in the world right now. So I think it's of growing importance.
Yeah, no, thank you. Ekdev, is that phrase something, citizen artist, something that you've thought about or heard about, or how would you apply it in terms of your own work today or what you hope to do in the future?
So in terms of the term itself, it's a little new to me, but like looking back in my life, I feel like I've been surrounded by so many citizen artists and I just never noticed it. And so, especially at this experience last time, I also felt like, people like Peter, Hasmin, VJ, Gretchen, the full From the Top team, as well as you, Mark, I found that it was almost like a different community, and that instead of just creating a show and then airing that later, we created something for the community, something where it feels like music can be so approachable, especially at such a young age for kindergarten kids to kids as old as myself. And so I found that in terms of being a citizen artist, I think it stretches far more than just the artistry itself, but really about sharing your love for music and using that passion that you have into, kind of helping the community and really enriching other people's lives through music and through other ways.
Yeah, well said. And John, what about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with everything Ekdev said 100%. I feel like everything we experienced From the Top, that was citizen artistry. I think, and it's like Ekdev said, it's a new term to me as well. But I believe when we talked about it in the courtyard, there was so many inspiring things that I heard from everybody, and it made my life so much better. And I walked out of that trip a better person, a better musician, with a different understanding of music and performance, less in terms of technique and competitions, and more of a love for music that I want to share with the world. And it's something that I think coexists with citizen artistry.
Yeah. I'm just curious about like the reward structure in the classical music world, like what it means to be excellent to be awarded in certain kind of competition, achieve certain kind of positions in an orchestra, etc. Are we doing enough to encourage that behavior, I guess, reward that behavior? Or is it felt like a distraction, like that's lovely, but I have to be on another track because if I'm going to make it, in quotes, they don't value that work. They want me to have more of this, that, or the other under my belt in terms of technique or performance or prizes. Is that how it is, or am I overstating it? Is the world catching up with this idea?
Well, I would say definitely competitions and stuff wise, there is a lot of tension that goes into competitions, especially when you're up against friends and people you know who are in your community. But the thing that makes it so much more bearable is the sense of community that you get when you go to things like All Region and All State and you're around other people and you get to know them. And no matter who makes it and who doesn't, you get to meet new people and you get to make new friends. And I will recall one of my favorite experiences of a reward that we won, and it was when Ekdev and I and the quartet, we went to our teacher, Mr. Smith's house, and to do like a practice interview for From the Top. And that was actually when we found out that we won the Jack Kent Cook Young Artist Award. And it was so funny because she brought it up like as if we'd already known, but Ekdev and I had no idea that we were receiving the award. And so she was like, so how do you guys feel that you received this award? And Ekdev and I were like, what? And then so from that moment on, it was just like utter joy. And then as soon as I swear, as soon as we got off the call, we just like jumped for joy, and it was the best feeling ever. That's probably one of my favorite experiences as a musician, was that moment with the quartet, when Ekdev and I found out about that. And I just remember being so happy, like we were all in tears. It was a great experience.
Yeah, fantastic. Peter, because you sort of span all these different worlds, what else out in the world gives you hope and makes you optimistic around this idea of fostering more citizen artists in the world?
Well, the Quantum Quartet gave me hope when I met you guys back in March. As you know, I was a big fan right off the bat. Just the energy that you two and your colleagues had, and it was, yeah, it's groups like that, it's individuals like that who I meet through From the Top, especially, that give me hope because I see the unbridled joy that they bring to the art form. Uh, Speaking of rewards, when I found out that you guys won the fish off competition this year, I was like, I'll never forget that moment. I texted everyone at From the Top like, yes, because that was a moment where it was like, okay, this competition is definitely doing something right. But I think when it, just to take a quick side note on competitions, it's always a little tricky because we never know what's going to be the thing that moves the judges one way or another. In the best circumstances, a competition can be great and can reward the right kind of excellence and the right kind of artists. And it doesn't, but it doesn't always. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to recognize that there are limitations to what competitions can do, but not to totally discount them either. But as far as giving me hope, it's seeing this next generation through my work at From the Top is definitely inspiring because they're all aware that the music they make, the art that they create, is not happening in a vacuum. And in a way, to me, that's sort of at the heart of what it means to be a citizen artist. Is you can either make one of two decisions. Like, one is my art, my music is purely for its own sake, and what I do at the piano in this room is the most important thing. And the other one is to recognize that it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and that it's part of something larger. And I think we're seeing more and more people who are aware of that second option, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it doesn't have to be either or, right? That it's,
Sure.
to use your example, either you're locked away in a practice room or you're doing the work that VJ does with Street Symphony. Like, those are the only two choices. But I think there's lots of ways to make a life in music where you're moving back and forth between all these different spheres and making a
Yeah.
difference in different ways. I'd hate to make that like a fork in the road for a young musician who's still figuring things out, that you're only going to do one or the other. But that, as Jazmin was saying, we're embedding into your training the idea that it's all of the piece, that this is what great artists do. Yeah. Jazmin, do you want to just share a bit about Fortissima initiative that you helped develop and how that relates to this conversation?
Sure. So I founded a program at Colburn in 2017 called the Fortissima Fellowship. And it began as a local pilot that ran through 2019 that has now informed a national program, which we'll be launching next fall when we're back on campus. So we'll be welcoming 10 young women from underrepresented minorities in classical music who are high school age, 14 to 18, and demonstrate high promise on an orchestral instrument, have an interest in pursuing a career in music, and bringing them onto campus for a week-long residential intensive where they'll get to take trial lessons with Colburn faculty, observe Colburn classes, but also receive pretty robust artistic and leadership development curriculum that I've worked to pilot in our local program here in LA. And it's really, it was really informed by my own experience as a young woman of color in classical music. So I was trained as a classical violinist, but I also grew up playing mariachi music. I come from a legacy mariachi family, and mariachi is a tradition and a genre that is inherently community engagement. There is, that co-creative piece is highly relevant in mariachi. We play at everything from birthdays to funerals to everything in between, major life events. People sing along to everything we play. There's a shared connection. And so in these two worlds that I navigated, I always had a curiosity to bring more of that spirit into my practice as a classical musician. And also when I was in classical music spaces, I frequently found myself being the only person of color. I was the concertmaster of my regional youth orchestra and the only person of color. So it was a difficult kind of landscape to navigate. And so I founded Fortissima as a way to both empower young women to pursue careers in the field and to connect them to mentors and colleagues who share their background, their cultural background and experience in the world, and give them the tools that that we equip conservatory students with, but a little earlier in their careers, so they have that knowledge a little earlier and can make informed decisions about their conservatory studies and later, hopefully, musical careers.
Everybody's different, I'm sure, but did they bring a different worldview to this conversation around community engagement than others at the Colburn Conservatory? Is their life experience viewing the place of music differently, or not necessarily? I'm just curious.
Well, now it's interesting because we have a lot of programs like YOLA in LA where, that are serving thousands of Black and brown kids in the city. And in that context, all they know is playing classical music with other Black and brown kids, and so part of Fortissima has also been introducing them to the idea that, if they decide to matriculate to a conservatory, how that experience might be different for them and what it means to be a person of color in a predominantly white institution, and the various sort of challenges that come with navigating that. And so I think in one way they do bring this sort of utopian lens, which is like, what is it when classical music is like young people of color? Like that's what they know to be true in a place like YOLA. And so allowing that to inform what their experience will be when they do enter that predominantly white institution.
Yeah, no, I got it. Great. Well, this is terrific. I want to thank all of you. Before we close, maybe just for each of you, any closing comments or message that you'd want to share. And we hope lots of different people will listen to this. But imagine they're young musicians who are listening. What message or encouragement would you want to share? Ekdev, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'd say the biggest thing is, sometimes we do get distracted, especially young musicians that, we've been kind of trained in a very discipline oriented way, and sometimes it's stressful, but you see a lot of improvement that way. But just know that at the end of the day, realize that you do music because you love it. And I encourage everyone to make music something that they carry with them for the rest of their lives. And certainly, I hope that I can do the same thing. So
Thank you. Gian, what would your closing message be?
One thing I would want to say is sometimes when I'm feeling discouraged or if I'm not the most motivated about music wise, I think back to my experience from the top and I remember why I love music so much. And it keeps me going forward and it's my drive, it's my passion, and it's why I keep pushing so hard. It's why I bust my lips to practice so much to play, because I love music and I love the people that it's brought me to. And so one thing I would say to the audience is if you're ever feeling discouraged, find out what it is that's your drive and focus on that, because if you do, you'll never stop going. And been a big part of my life, and I hope it'll be a big part of everybody else's life too.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, there's a difference between a personal passion and a chore. And if it feels like a chore, then it's time to revisit your purpose. Yeah. Jazmin, what would you add that maybe we haven't covered so far?
I think I would add to any young artist, especially listening, just keep going. I hear a lot of just distress from students right now who are close to graduation and have a degree in, bassoon performance and are a little worried about what their prospects are going to be on the other side of this pandemic. And I just want to say to anyone who has those feelings that we need you to keep going, to bring your unique voice into the world. And there are still ways to make a career fulfilling and sustainable as an artist in the year 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, well, yeah, let's hope so. And I would add to that combating loneliness and isolation, I think, has never been more urgent than it is right now. And music in so many different ways has the ability to let people connect with either something deep in themselves or in others. So like as a lifeline for humanity, music is more important than ever. And Peter, we'll give you the closing last word. What message do you want to leave for those listening?
So many amazing things have already been said. I guess mine would be for especially for the young musicians watching, to think about those things that make you unique, the elements in your own background, in your identity, in the things you love about music or about other things. But think about what makes you unique and just know that that's your greatest value. If you start to look around you at the industry and feel like there's a cookie cutter type that's being rewarded, don't pay that any attention. Get in touch with the thing that makes you unique and amplify that element, because that's what's going to be your ticket forward, and that's what's going to sort of determine where your path is going to take you. The music world is getting more and more open-ended in terms of where your path may go. The thing that's going to guide you down the best path is just being really like aware of who you are and loving that identity. So I guess that's it.
Right. Well, thank you. In closing, I want to thank everybody for joining us and listening. We hope this has been meaningful for you. I want to underscore the vital work that From the Top does, and we'd encourage you to learn more at From the Top website, where you can also listen to the program recorded at the Wallis, hear these tremendous young musicians, as well as Peter. Jazmin was powerfully working behind the scenes, but not on stage. So I don't know that you'll hear her in the show, but her voice and her message filtered through the entire week. So let's hope that we can all join together in person at some point. But in the meantime, I hope you and your family stay healthy and safe. And with that, we'll sign off for today. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.